Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. How can philosophy help Muslims in their endeavor in this world? When we talk about philosophy, we have to distinguish two things. The first thing is the process of how one deals with the approach of thinking, and the second one is the product of the philosophy. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that because the Islamic tradition and philosophy had a lot of push and pull. If you were to go through the Islamic tradition and look at how the different scholars across the different generations and across the different eras dealt with philosophy, you would see that there has been quite a bit of intellectual production trying to deal with this idea of philosophy, which is quite confusing to most people. Why would some scholar, for example, say that philosophy is forbidden or philosophy is disbelief? And why would others say philosophy is essential? And why would somebody else say philosophy is mandatory in order to understand Islam? And then you have some other scholars that would say it is okay as long as it's kept within a certain limit. That's why I'm dividing philosophy into two aspects. The first one is the process, which is basically how we think and how we approach the topic that we want to philosophize about. And the second one is the product. Now, how to think and how to ponder and how to exercise your mind in viewing this world, that is something that is open for everybody. Anybody can spend their time contemplating things and thinking about it. So there's nothing wrong with that. That is something that is natural and is human. The idea of needing to ask questions and the idea of needing to find answers and the idea of needing to basically standardize some approaches and some ways of looking at this world. And the second part is the product, the philosophical product. And this is where the issue sometimes lies. So when some scholars say philosophy is kufr, is disbelief, what they mean is that that certain production of philosophy could have an element of disbelief. For example, if somebody sits there and philosophizes that there is no creator and everything is here by mere chance, that ground, that the idea of thinking about that, there's no issue with that, but the result, the product of that, that there is no God, there is no divine power, is where the issue is. That's where the scholars would have issues with the concept of philosophy. So if we put that out of the way right now, well, how can philosophy help Muslims? Well, philosophy can help Muslims and everybody else in the world in three aspects. The first one, it helps define the overarching umbrella before we get to the details. What I mean by that is that if there is no foundation, if there is no worldview, if there is no understanding of the big picture, then all the small scenarios, all the minor details, they might turn out to be conflicting. Let me give an example. When humanity, and specifically the West, asked the question, is it important to follow ethos, to have some sort of ethical endeavors, and to have some sort of ethical background in this life? There were many answers that came out because they were trying to say, why should someone be ethical? Why would someone why would someone be honest? Why would someone be truthful? Why would someone be kind? What's the reason for that? So, after thinking a lot, one school of thought came out and said, because being ethical helps in the personal benefit. If the person is honest and the person is truthful and the person is kind, then a benefit will come to that person individually. So they would have a personal gain from that. And from this overarching understanding, a whole school of thought developed, and they started looking at the details of how can someone be ethical so that they can benefit themselves. Another approach that came is that having ethics in one's life is important, and we follow ethics, or we follow the ethical behaviors because it is good for everyone, not just good for the individual themselves. It is good for the whole community. It has communal benefits. That's a different worldview to ethics than the first one. And from there, a whole philosophy and school of thought developed. Then someone else came, like the philosopher Kant, and he said, being ethical is a must in and within itself. You don't need other reasons to be ethical. You have to be ethical because you have to be ethical. And that developed another school of thought of why is someone mandated to be ethical? Because ethics is important. And what are the ethics that are necessarily essential, or that are necessary and essential in our society? So this is important. This is the first uh, aspect of how philosophy can help Muslims. The second one is that it can help answer the big questions, the major questions of that era. Let me give you an example. Muslims, for example, in the Islamic tradition and in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, there is constant emphasis of how the righteous and how the people that have the truth will end up prevailing, and how the people that don't have the truth and don't have the and they're not righteous, they will end up losing at the end of the day. All right. So the big questions that can arise from that is, how can the someone like the Muslims be in a state where they are not prevailing? Right now, the status of the Muslim world is not great. It has a lot of political issues, a lot of economical issues, a lot of social issues, a lot of ethical issues. So how come the people that have the truth, Islam, are not prevailing? How come countries like China, for example, a country that is a communist, that is non-religious, that is divine defying, they refuse the concept of God, that are oppressive, that kill their people and attack other countries, how can they be prevailing? That's an interesting question. How can someone like some of the countries that are currently in the world that are attacking other countries, say for example the United States, the army or the armies of the United States is everywhere in the world. The army of the United States led the attack on Iraq and destroyed it and killed millions of people there. And how can the United States be prevailing? How can the Muslims under the rule of the Ottoman Empire end up losing that caliphate despite them having the truth, which is Islam? These are major questions to be asked for this era that we're living in. And if the Muslims are honest with themselves, then what they can do is that they can benefit from philosophy when they pose these questions. And the third benefit to philosophy for the Muslims, as well as everybody else, is in posing the new questions that need answers. Sometimes more than half of the work is in asking the right question. If people ask the right question then they can start looking for answers. If they ask the wrong question, then they will get derailed and they would waste time and effort trying to look for an answer that does not solve the problem. A lot of the great mathematicians, they pose many very difficult questions, philosophical and mathematical questions, that they themselves might not be able to answer, but they leave it to the next generations to answer. I'll give you another example. Up to the 19th century, the Newtonian physics was dominant in the physics sciences. So the worldview about how it operates was the Newtonian mechanics physics. Then you have some scholars like Planck and Einstein and others that came and posed the question in a different way. How does a particle move? How does the particle of light move and behave? Well, if we talk about Newtonian physics, light is just merely a particle. That's it. But by having Planck and Einstein and others pose the question differently, they realized that light behaves like a particle as well as a wave. And that opened a huge field called quantum physics. Now, many of the winners of the big prizes in the world are contributors to this field, quantum physics. And before these questions were posed, the Newtonian physics, the science of the Newtonian physics was saturated. There was no more contribution to give. That's it. It was filled, it was discussed in every possible way. And then somebody came and opened the door to a whole new field. Now, how did that come about? That came about because someone decided to think outside of this realm, decided to look at this world with a different eye or with a different perspective and philosophize about how this world operates. If we look at many of the sections in the library, a lot of the books that are there, novels, these are fiction books, they are science fiction books. And those science fiction books, they push the boundaries of our today's understanding and our possibilities of the current worldview beyond the envelope. And this is very important because that's things like this, being able to philosophize about such questions, would allow this generation as well as the next generations to ask questions and look for answers that are new, that can take humanity to the next level. So Muslims as well can benefit from philosophy, and they should start posing some very tough questions. They should ask these abnormal questions and not be afraid of them. Asking the question merely is not a problem. Thinking about it is not a problem. But what happens if we don't? Then the community will continue to live in fear because they would not take the first step to move forward. They would wait. If they see there's a possibility and they want to take the step forward, because the community is afraid to ask these tough questions, they would retract. And then when the world advances, then the Muslims will fall. So hence, Muslims will always be a step behind unless they allow that field of questioning to start or to come back, just like it came back in the 8th century, in the 6th up to the 8th century of the Islamic Empire. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and we Shall see you in the next episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.